right. So, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us. I wasn't necessarily going to do the introduction tonight, but our public programs, our curator of public programs and education, Gwendolyn Fernandez, is ushering a new life into this world right now. So, send her the best wishes. And my name is Juniper Larissy, and I serve as the executive director of the Harwood Museum of Art. We're grateful that you've chosen to spend your evening with us and honored to host this distinguished panel of powerful Taos Pueblo women. I want to begin by acknowledging that we are on the historic homelands of the Red Willow people within the original territory of Taos Pueblo. As a sign of our humble respect, we recognize the unique and enduring relationship that exists between Indigenous peoples and their traditional homeland. Just outside the walls of this auditorium, we are surrounded by the creative work of Raven Chacon that amplifies stories of Indigenous survival, resistance, and creativity, inviting us to listen and reflect deeply. Following the panel, we'll open the galleries so that you may spend some time with these works of art as you reflect on the lessons learned in this space tonight. May this acknowledgement and this exhibition serve as a reminder of our ongoing efforts to respectfully recognize, honor, reconcile, and partner with the Red Willow people whose land and water we benefit from today in this great valley. It is now my honor to introduce our moderator this evening, Ms. Dr. Christina M Castro. Who identifies as Taos Pueblo, Jemez Pueblo, and Xicana, is a mother, writer, scholar, educator, community organizer, multidimensional artist, public speaker, and farmer. In 2017, Dr. Castro co-founded Three Sisters Collective, 3SC, a Pueblo women-centered grassroots organization devoted to art, advocacy, education, and community building. She received her doctorate from the Pueblo PhD Program in Arizona State University's School of Social Transformation and Justice Studies in 2018, and is an independent consultant with Castro Consulting Limited. And I'll let Christina take it away to introduce our panelists. Thank you and welcome.
Yahoo to all my Taos relatives in the audience. Thank you for being here, everybody. I want to go ahead and take some time to introduce the panelists before we start. So let's start with Midnite Lujan to my left. Next slide, please. Well, actually, yeah, sorry. I did it alphabetically, so we might have to jump around a little bit, but I'm going to do this. So Midnite Lujan is Taos Pueblo in Swedish. Born and raised in Taos, New Mexico, Lujan is an emerging talent committed to lifelong sobriety and is a full-time student at the Institute of American Indian Arts, pursuing a BFA in creative writing. They also are the founder of the Home Camp Initiative, which you may have heard of. They do a lot of advocacy around raising money to help people in the Pueblo with house repairs and things of that nature, because we realize when we have emergencies that come up, there's like a broken window, and they need help. And so they've been actively working and committed to embodying the creative processes and disciplines of decolonization through behavioral health and wellness, grassroots organizing, literature, advocacy, and creative direction and production. So give it up for Midnite. So I just want to say, because they're young women who are really doing great work, and I want to acknowledge y'all's work, because sometimes it's always, you see the same people getting recognized over and over again, and it's good to diversify and show what different folks in our community are doing. And with that being said, I want to introduce Emileah Lujan. Emileah was born and raised traditionally in Taos Pueblo, home of the Red Willow people. Inspired by the movement at Standing Rock in 2016, Emileah discovered her voice as an Indigenous youth. Her journey reflects personal transformation and resilience. As a recovering addict, she has found purpose in the recovery field, grassroots organizing, advocacy, and creative arts. Emileah is a third-generation hoop dancer and fancy shawl dancer, currently blending traditional dance with resistance performance arts to promote cultural preservation and social change. And I have to say, I actually, I don't know if you remember, I told you, do you remember when I met you for the first time at Standing Rock? Interestingly enough, we're both Taos Pueblo, but it wasn't until I was at Standing Rock that I met you and your dad, like way at your little northern Pueblo camp you had over there. They had a Pueblo camp, but then they had kind of their own little northern Pueblo camp, which is very Taos of me. So moving on to our third panelist, last but not least, we have Autumn Dawn Gomez, a beloved sibling of mine, Taos Pueblo Comanche. They are a multidisciplinary artist specializing in community and public murals, graphic design, printing, and workshops. Born and raised in Ogapoge, Owingeh, aka Santa Fe, Autumn is also the co-founder of Three Sisters Collective, along with myself, a community-based grassroots organization creating space for Indigenous women, femmes, and their families in so-called Santa Fe. Autumn is often found organizing with community, creating, learning about birth work and herbalism, and spending time with her family and cat. Autumn is an on-being social healing fellow for 2023-2024, and you can find more work about them at their website right there. Do you want to tell us how you say that word right here?
That's remixc.
All right, so again, welcome everybody. We're in a time of great change, y'all. Can you feel it? Women are reclaiming our power the world over. The matriarch after 500 years of the impositions of three waves of colonialism, Spanish, American, nuclear, all of which are steeped in toxic patriarchy, resulting in an ongoing assault of violence. The MMIR, missing and murdered Indigenous relatives rates, are the highest in our state. And I would argue that those go hand in hand with the resource extraction that you see in the gas and oil industries and the nuclear industries that you see in this state. Because as we know as Indigenous people, what happens to the land happens to the people and our bodies. We have nuclear colonialism to contend with, beginning in the 1940s, and the proliferation of the atomic age and all that came with it, which disrupted our Indigenous lifeways, disrupted our birthways in favor of the nuclear family and the family structure. It was in the 50s when our healthcare turned over to Indian Health Services, when we previously were doctored in our own communities by medicine people, midwives, birth workers. People are routinely a casualty of the gas, oil, and nuclear industries. But here we are, still holding on to our core values as Pueblo women, excelling, healing, and thriving in spite of. We are land defenders, healthcare workers, artists, lawyers, social workers, farmers, politicians, mothers. We take care of our families, our elders. We hold our traditions. Education. And some of us are tradition bearers who would never call themselves activists, but that's what they're doing. They're advocating. Some of us don't. Some of us take more conventional routes to creating change within the system, and some of us don't. And there isn't just one way we do things. I would like to say we're never predictable and are always adapting and pushing conventions. I always say that we do need to develop a new language for the advocacy we do as Native people and Indigenous people in general, because our struggles are tied to the land and our ability to exercise the fullness of our humanity in our ancestral homelands. This is a unique struggle. It requires its own naming. When we default to the names they call us, protests, activists, I know I just used it, trying to come away from those languages and develop new terminologies, because those can get quickly spun and used against us. I was just looking up the Taos Rebellion of 1847 and how that is what it's coined in the history books. And I was like, oh, interesting, rebellion, terrorists, terrorism, things like that. We have to think about critically about those words and who gets implicated in the use of those words. When we use those languages that they call us, those things that they call us, then it renders us at the mercy of their interpretations and their media spins. So I would like to say, I would like to start our questions by asking our panelists, how does your art and advocacy connect to for you? Tell us about you, who you are, and your work and disciplines.
Nice to see everyone here. As mentioned before, my name is Lujan. I am a multidisciplinary artist. I focus on the fundamental value known as reciprocity. So with my creative process, I think about reciprocity within the context of what it means to be a Taos Pueblo woman. This being taught and passed down to me through my grandmother, Josephine Lujan. She was an exceptional woman. She was embodied, and she brought a lot of life and taught very, 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 very much with her heart. And with her essence, I was able to learn from other women in the community. With me comes, I want to say, an army. Culture bearers, traditionalists, contemporary voices, etc. We are all people, we are all women, and if not the sooner, the time is now. The time is now to acknowledge what it means to be an Indigenous woman within a light where we are protected, in a light where we are honored, like the lilacs, like the butterflies. So that's what fuels my creative process. Just a small interior view. So I'm gonna pass this on to Emileah, who has been actually quite a profound inspiration to me. I am 6 years sober, free of alcohol. Emileah, so choosing sobriety throughout a time of climate catastrophe, ecocide, support through your sisters, through your people, was the way. And Emileah was in those things with me. We're here today to share our story. And Emileah is a dancer. She has a lot to teach.
Hello, my name is Emileah Lujan. My Indian name is Misty Rainflower, Pueblo, and I'm honored to be here tonight. First, I just want to thank Dr. Christina Castro, who's been such a huge influence in my life. She has empowered me to step into my power as an Indigenous woman and step across lines into a creative field that I didn't even know I was capable of. And so the women sitting next to me and those that are behind us and beside us and that have guided the way, I just want to acknowledge and send gratitude to. To acknowledge the question, how does my art and advocacy connect to the strength of Indigenous matriarchs and Indigenous women before me? I've been reflecting on that, and I think a lot of the women that have come before me, I witnessed them. I witnessed them be resilient. And when people acknowledge me as resilient, sometimes I don't want to be strong. I'm tired sometimes. But I think witnessing the resilience among us and those before us has led to resistance and has fostered a sense of courage within myself to stand up for what is right And I want to acknowledge the Standing Rock movement as well. That was one of the first spaces that I was encouraged as an Indigenous youth and as an Indigenous woman. That movement was led by youth, and so it completely shifted my perspective on the power of and it was guided by women. These circles and these movements were guided by women. It sparked something with sometimes I get acknowledged as a youth and I laugh and I'm like, I'm 30. Do I still count as a youth? But always acknowledging the women that have come before me and that have struggled against the patriarchy and that I have witnessed step into their own power, whether that's in a traditional world or the modern world that we live in. Those women like Castro, that have broken the mold and that have fostered that courage that I am allowed to take up space. And I am honored in that way. I am sacred. And stepping into that, and it's an honor to work into the behavioral health field. I also, like Midnite mentioned, I'm in recovery. And I get to work with youth. And I get to instill these values, these lessons in them that they are sacred. And one of my art disciplines is I'm a hoop dancer. I'm a third generation hoop dancer. I'm following in my grandfather Bobby Lujan's footsteps. And when I first started hoop dancing, it was told to me that women aren't supposed to be hoop dancers. It was a male's dance. And I was called, the hoops called to me, and they represent so much and so much healing energy. And so I am a woman hoop dancer, and I'm proud of that. And I'm proud to be an Indigenous woman from Taos Pueblo, following and paving the way for other Indigenous women to step into their power. Because like Midnite said, this is the time. I think we've witnessed resilience from the women before us, and now we also are empowered to resist and to find the courage to stand up and claim our space as Indigenous women. So it's an honor to be here with the women that are here with me, and then pass this on to Autumn, who has just also been inspirational in their work at the Three Sisters Collective and just has also paved the way for Indigenous women.
Yoho anshu papua ema hamarewe kananan heta yuvani napiana namani Apache Oklahoma Scott ma apana namani Taos Pueblo Scott. So good evening, everybody. I'm Autumn Gomez. I'm so happy to be here with this panel. So my work, I do different kinds of work. I do murals and other public art, as well as I would define it as maybe healing work, but not in the spiritual way. I work with communities facilitating meetings, facilitating ideas, and really trying to think the way my grandparents taught me in order to problem solve within my given communities. So for me, I was raised by my matriarch, Jemez Pueblo, who's a Comanche elder. She's 98 years old, and I spent most of my youth traveling the country with her, going to lots of Comanche sacred sites, learning the language, and most importantly, learning the values. When I was able to be here in Taos with my dad's family, my grandpa, the late David Gomez, he taught me everything I know. He taught me how to be tough. He taught me how to make good decisions, especially, and how to really hear out the people who needed my guidance or who would need my guidance in the future, and how to listen to my own inner self. So those people were beautiful and amazing, and I was able to witness the community that they grew around them, the community of people who really looked up to them and came to them for advice. And by just watching them, because my parents were off doing their thing, I spent a lot of time with either side of my grandparents, and I really feel like I picked up their values and their understandings of the world. So through that, I became a visual artist, and my living in Ogopoge, also known as Santa Fe, the main thing is like market. You gotta be in the market, you gotta be in the gallery. But I knew that wasn't for me. I wanted to tell my people stories, and so again, through observation, I came up with like my own way to hear my people and what their concerns were, what their stories were, and mainly like what they want to communicate with the world. And I am able to draw it on a piece of paper and then turn that drawing on a piece of paper to a giant on a wall. So that's what I've been doing for the past 3 years, and also the leadership of people like Dr. Castro over here, Kathy Sanchez, Beata Sosi Pena, all these other Pueblo women who are a little bit older than me, but they have like really done the work of paving the way professionally as advocates for Mother Earth, as advocates for women, as advocates for birth workers. They've really done so much work, and I have the privilege to step into that space they've created and then do more work so I can create more space for my younger siblings here.
Thank you all. I can relate to you, Autumn, talking about being raised by your grandparents, because I too was raised by my grandparents, and my grandma was from here at Taos, and my grandpa was from Jemez, but they were a part of the federal Indian relocation program. So that was a assimilation policy disguised as a work education program. So that was a time when in the 50s, there was a lot of change going on in our communities. We were moving from agrarian people, farmers, to cash economy, people having to work, and that was my grandfather had been already displaced by boarding school, coming from Jemez Pueblo in a wagon to Santa Fe, only going home for holidays and in the summer. And so that was the first displacement. And then when this opportunity to go work in the city came along, they had a young family and they left. But with my grandparents, I was always going back and forth and traveling with them, and I feel very rooted in both of my pueblos, despite of not having been raised in my villages. But I'm learning, and it's never too late to learn. So I really appreciate folks who have helped me learn, and now I feel like it's my responsibility to give back to those who helped me. So it's an ongoing process of sisterhood. But I know we talked a little bit about sobriety, and that's something that I think we're all here sober from alcohol, which I think is pretty amazing, considering the effects of alcohol on, I can speak personally to my family. I think all of our families are impacted by substance abuse, not just Native people, across the board, right? Yes. So, they like to say Native, there's stereotypes about us, but we're not disproportionately alcoholics. It's just there's less of us. So so I growing up around family that coped with assimilation through drugs and alcohol, I saw a lot and I experienced a lot. My family loved me. It was never about love. I think it was just a part of the culture of the time. But I think there's a new generation. I'm 4 years sober. You just said you were how many years sober?
Going on 6.
6, and how about you? 4. And so I think there's something to be said about that. I mean, that's huge compared to how we were growing up. I mean, it's a different time. And I'm wondering, how does sobriety factor into your advocacy? And do you think it's necessary that we as Native people live in sobriety in order to fully actualize the indigenous liberatory futurisms that we desire?
Can I get a hell yeah?
So we're natives in the house, raise your hands.
Hey, let's go. That's what I like to hear entirely, yes. I am a very, very, very active advocate for sobriety. Whether you're indigenous, non-native, it really don't matter. It is poison. It is poison. It is responsible for cultural genocide. It is responsible for some of the greatest pain that we could possibly endure, I guess, you know? And although there's less of us as Native peoples, we still experience very unique circumstances. And to cope with an ongoing colonial rule, right? To cope with what I like to call or coin as neocolonialism seems to be the grunt of the work. So when we can confront that we are human and that we belong within a sober frame of mind, and we have access to our fundamental values, right, or needs, let's say, access to food, healthy food, right? We're growing our food, access to secure shelter, access to clean waters. This is very important here in northern New Mexico. So the more we can focus on preserving our clean waters, then we can feel like we belong here, right, as human beings. To be in good relationship with the land, you have to be in good relationship with yourself. Period. You have to heal, you have to confront that pain, that generational trauma in order to do well and to lead in a good way. It takes time, but our people are very patient. Us as Pueblo-women, we can teach that. We can just show that to you. So sobriety, yes, is very important. And I call on anyone and everyone to challenge, these toxic coping mechanisms, whether they be alcoholism, drug misuse, shopping, any of it, gambling, going to the casino, it don't matter. Put the Twinkies down. Just yeah. It's all about that, having humility. Starting with a strong foundation.
Strong foundations. I wouldn't have the foundation that I have today without recovery and without sobriety. Being able to sit next to these sisters who have deeply aided and impacted my recovery, it's such an honor. Sobriety definitely factors into who I am today. I've learned key components that have served as my foundation. I believe that drugs were never my problem. They were the solution to all of my problems. Midnite talked about generational trauma, and generational trauma within Indigenous people runs deep. And it's not that far back, right? I think we speak about this generational trauma and colonialism and colonization as if it happened thousands and thousands of years ago, but it didn't. The boarding school era was not that long ago, and so as Indigenous people, we live with those traumas. Our grandparents' lived through the boarding school era, lived through all of these traumas, and it got carried, whether my grandparents, my parents, whether they were in the boarding school era, they lived with that because they were then raised by people who lived in survival. And I think just recently we're getting to a generation where we're not surviving. We are being empowered to begin to thrive. And we have the capacity, and we have the resources, and we have the network, and we have the connection to be able to thrive. For me, I believe the opposite of addiction is connection. To be able to, and that connection can come in many different forms. It can come in connection to sisters, to relatives, connection to the land, connection to self, connection to creative outlets. And those have all served as for my healing. I have found connection and I have found positive and healthy coping skills, which I think is completely necessary, because if we don't have these positive coping skills, we're just suppressing, and we're not addressing that generational trauma. We're just continuing to pass it on. And so, kind of reiterating what Midnite said, until we address and heal these wounds that come from within and come from our lineage, and stand, and it ends with us. This generational trauma ends with me. I will not pass it on to the next generation. I have learned that connection is the opposite of addiction, and connection is how we heal these traumas, and we need to support each other, and we need to uplift each other, and love one another. And I believe love is the answer. And I'm not talking about that toxic masculinity love. I'm talking about loving one another, and loving the land, and loving who we are and who we come from, and loving ourselves. If we love ourselves, we no longer feel the need to destroy ourselves or escape. And that's kind of what alcohol and drugs are used for, to escape. And when we can love ourselves and accept where we are, and we become empowered to do something different. And I believe, circling back to the question, in order to fully actualize the Indigenous liberatory futurisms we desire, sobriety is absolutely necessary. We cannot create a future where we are free and we are honored and we are sacred until we honor ourselves. And so it is an honor to be here with women who honor themselves and honor the land and the people and the work that we do. Tom.
I just want to, again, uplift both of y'all, your stories, your determination to become your fully realized selves. And I really feel like that's beautiful and should be celebrated for all our Native people who are able to really try and do that, however that means to them. For me, yes, sobriety. I come from a line of single mothers because of alcoholism. I come from a family on my mother's side where we hardly have any men because of alcoholism. And for me personally, I've had my fun, my days, but it was when I started studying to be a birth worker that I realized that alcohol wasn't conducive to the lifestyle of being on call or having to get up at 2 a.m. to check on the mama or to check on the pregnant person who might deliver later that day. So in that and through my own long and extensive health journey, I think that at the same time as Christina did, we both decided that it just wasn't serving us. It wasn't serving us socially. It wasn't serving us mentally. It definitely was not serving anyone spiritually. And these are the things that are important. It was also that time when I was starting to get into birth work and becoming a doula that I really started to contemplate, in English, they call it self-care, and what that means to be a Native woman and what is self-care. And of course it means many different things, but I realized that many of my older generations around me didn't have a notion of self-care and self-preservation, and that as a younger person and a person who may influence others, I want to show people that even though that I have a disability, or even though that life is hard, that we can still care for each other, care for ourselves, and that is one way that do that.
Thank you. Okay, so moving on, let's talk about the Pueblo Revolt of 1680. Did you know much of the planning around the Pueblo Revolt happened in Taos Pueblo and Taos? So our people have a long story of cultural fortitude and resisting the impositions coming from all around us and continue to come all around us. I just came from a hearing today at the Roundhouse where I was speaking up against their proposing industries in this state are proposing to reuse fracking water, treated toxic fracking water, and repurpose it and sell it to industry to use in whatever ways. So I was at the Roundhouse today using my voice to advocate for the water, for access to clean water in a drought-ridden state. They have billions of gallons to frack, and then they want to take that water and sell it to industry so people can be exposed to toxins in their workplace. So yes, much of the planning of the Pueblo Revolt of 1680 happened here in Taos, in our Pueblo. The people of Taos Pueblo have always been known as vigilant in defending our land and our lifeways. You may know about the landmark Blue Lake case. In December of 1970, President Nixon signed back Blue Lake, place of our emergence, back to the people after 67 years of our people fighting for that land and advocating and going to D.C. And you know who they met in D.C. was this woman named LaDonna Harris, who was married to a state senator, Fred Harris, and she was Comanche. And it was through her meeting the Taos Pueblo delegation and being in D.C. with her senator husband, she was Native, he was white, that she took on the cause. So again, a woman was involved in helping Taos Pueblo, a Native woman, and we don't really hear her get much credit for that either. But one thing we never hear about in a lot of our narratives, whether it's the Pueblo Revolt or the Blue Lake or various things, is women's roles in these great historical events. I've heard a lot of scholars talk about the Pueblo Revolt. I really have never once heard a Pueblo male scholar talk about women's roles in the Pueblo Revolt. And I'm like, how is that possible? I know how much women do in ceremonial doings, so I can't imagine things were any different. One of the murals that we did with Your Sisters Collective was an homage to women's roles in the Pueblo Revolt. And it shows a series of women weaving yucca yarn or yucca rope. And if you know the story of the Pueblo Revolt, they made the yucca cords and they knotted them, and the runners took them to all the pueblos. Every day they unknotted a cord, and at the end of that rope signaled when the Pueblo Revolt was supposed to start. So just looking at all the ways we support our communities as Native women, I don't know that anything could get done without us, you know? But most of our pueblos are patriarchal. There's only a couple of pueblos that have women governors. Currently, the governor of Hawaii is a woman. I know Isleta, they're Tiwa, and they have women leadership, so it's just a handful. And although we come from very traditional communities, Jemez Pueblo and Taos, and I don't know if we'll ever see women as leaders in our lifetime, but it's something we can consider for the future. But how do we start claiming our roles in our own cultural narratives as Pueblo women? Is that a big question? Does anybody want to take that on?
I can. Okay, great.
That's right.
That's a heavy-handed question. There's some serious history being, shared here, and I encourage everyone in the audience, if you can and haven't, let's say, done the research, please do. Please do the research. the history, learning the history of Taos. And this is actually quite saddening, but it's funny and ironic in a way, but I'm in my second year at the Institute of American Indian Arts. I'm pursuing a degree in creative writing. I'm currently, I would say, weathered in all disciplines at this point. I feel very confident and open to reframing the narratives, right? And the source of this is having read my people's history for the first time at 25 years old. Can you believe that? First time reading my own people's history at 25 years old. This book was published in 1998. It's called Eight Centuries of Taos Pueblo History, written by Joe Sando. A very good one.
Who was from Jemez Pueblo, and he got exiled from the community for writing about Jemez. He got kicked out. He wrote a book called Mi Hemish.
Right, so when we think about the curve of information and how young people are getting access to it, right? How are our own people getting access to this information? I had to go to the Institute of American Indian Arts hoping and praying that I can get an indigenized education. Oral history, oral tradition, you know, Henrietta Gomez is our grandmother, she's a story keeper, you know, learning the power of being a storyteller from your own community is something that's very, you know, special, right? Something special to hold on to. But when you confront that with the reality that our narratives aren't accessible until you're 25 and you have to seek them out 5, 6 years sober, you know, on your own volition, it can feel a little discouraging, but it's also very valuable teaching, being, you know, having perseverance, right? So what we're offering here, I would say collectively, is an opportunity to critique and analyze and bring forward narratives that are up to date and reflect not only the importance of the Indigenous matriarch, but also the importance of the role which we carry in amplifying and taking care of our men as well. Our men are equally as important. My father is from Taos Pueblo. My mother is from rural Ohio. She's American. Dawn, I love you, mama. I love you, mama. So she to me is, you know, the source of my tension, right? Having a mother who is not needed. What does that teach you? That teaches you how to be an American woman, right? Being raised by your father, who is a traditionalist, coming from a lineage of veterans. We have people in our community, men in our community, who went to war to protect our peace. This is generations long. All of us here, we have men like that in our families. So to acknowledge that from the American perspective, and to also heal through the Indigenous perspective, and being raised by my people of Taos Pueblo, not only my family, but I'm telling you, there are people in these rooms, in this room today, that played a role in simply being the narrative that we need to be in order to rewrite our histories and inform y'all of what really is going down. So, with that, I'm going to take the opportunity to say free Palestine. Jesus Christ. Anyways, Mama, I love you. If you're listening, I love you. Thank you for raising me. And Papa, Mama, I love you too. So, Emma, here you go.
That was beautiful, Tom. Speaking on the narratives, I think that's what we're doing here. We are rewriting our own narratives. And how do we do that? We simply do. We simply do. As Indigenous women, we get to create our narratives. And there was one thing that was said, that there isn't Indigenous women in leadership roles. And that may be true for tribal government. But I'm sitting next to 3 Indigenous leaders today. 3 Indigenous, 4. We are Indigenous leaders. We are the ones that are going to create this next generation. We are the ones that are going to empower the next generation. all of those that have been influential in our lives and empowered us. Midnite mentioned that we have an army. We have sisters. And when we begin to own our power and we begin to tell our own stories, that is how we rewrite the narrative. I can't imagine a revolution today that there wasn't a narrative that was written and told by a woman. And that in itself is beautiful. That in itself gives me hope. Because Indigenous women all over, not only Indigenous nations, but all over the country, women are being acknowledged as sacred, and we are being acknowledged as we are no longer less than men. We are equal, and I love that Midnite did acknowledge that our men do play a role in our societies. And I'm thankful for the men in my life, my father, who has empowered me as an Indigenous woman, and who has encouraged me to speak up and stand for what I believe in, despite threats of being exiled, despite people in my own community telling me to shh, we don't speak about that. Guess what? I do. And I wouldn't have become empowered without the influences that have been influential in my life. Dr. Christina Castro being a huge one of those. Just reminding me that I do have a voice and I do have a right to use it. And I believe that is how we rewrite our stories. We write them. And just hearing Midnite's endeavor in the educational system in creative writing, I promise you there's going to be beautiful, beautiful work. So, more to come.
This reminds me of like a kitchen table debate that I had with my uncle, my oldest uncle here at house, and we were talking about leadership, and he was like, men always ran things, and I was like, I understand that, uncle, but who took care of the babies? And who took care of, women's things? Like, I was trying to get that information because unlike my mother's family, who is all women, my father's family is all men. So I don't really have any aunties to ask. So just thinking about that conversation and like refining my thoughts as I get older, and to the concept of rematriation, it doesn't mean women taking over, because that's the imbalance. We live and we thrive in a balanced society. And I myself see myself as a balanced person. I can be feminine, I can be masculine, I can be both. And does that make me any less of a person? It possibly makes me more of a person. I'm not sure yet. But that is to say that the goal is to be in balance with yourself and with the earth, however you see fit, however you do that internally or mentally, intellectually. And in this world that we're in right now, balance seems near impossible. It's always about like getting the bills paid and getting somewhere on time and doing things at a certain level. And the boss said this, but I know they really mean this, etc. So trying to become into balance with oneself and with the earth is pretty hard. But with this idea of rematriation, I feel like it's more of like a cosmic tide that's bringing in the voices of matriarchs, the matriarchs of our families, and the matriarchs of our tribal people into the conversation, because only, like, not just one side has the solutions to what we really, all the pressing things. We need to hear all of each other out And I think in that's where the solutions lie, is to listen to what everybody has to say, regardless of how they appear or what their gender is or any of that. And I know that in our home there's specific roles, but there's also a reason there are specific roles, and there's a reason why we do everything. So just taking that into mind, and yes, just thinking about the recreation of balance that we have, that we are on the horizon of, is something that motivates me.
Can we get a time check?
Is 6:56, but we really.
Okay.
The conversation
Do you want to keep
is
going?
amazing. I don't want to rush you.
Okay, because I have like 2 more questions. Is that okay? Okay.
All right, we're good.
So you you springboarded to the next topic, and that is Western feminism versus Indigenous rematriation. So what is the difference? Let's talk about it. Did you know that contemporary notions of feminism came from Indigenous women? Did you know that? No? Okay, so when those early settler women were coming in the 1700s, or whenever they were coming, for Plymouth Rock and all that, when settlers were coming and colonizing the East Coast, guess who they ran into? Native people and Native women, grandmothers, leaders. They were blown away. This women's leadership didn't exist in Euro-Christian culture. They didn't even know about women's efficacy and the ways Indigenous women were leading and governing and matriarching in tribal communities. They came from a culture where women were second-class citizens, and still are. Contemporary feminism is often rooted in capitalistic notions of individual advancement, economic parity with men, etc. For me personally, I don't resonate with Western feminism because I don't think it's robust enough to describe the responsibilities that we carry as Indigenous women and femmes to our culture, our responsibility to our land, caretaking our communities, ceremonial obligations, all the things that we do. So I think I always say we don't need Western feminism. Feminism needs us. And so I wondered if feminism is something that resonates with you as an Indigenous woman, why or why not? And what makes Indigenous matriarchy different and rematriation different? Back to the new words. Feminism is new. We've had women leadership. When the Spanish came, they didn't acknowledge, just like those early colonizers on the East Coast, the Spanish that colonized here, they didn't recognize women's leadership. So we had to establish a Spanish Catholic colonial system. That's why we have governors and lieutenant governors in our villages. They didn't see women as equal. So we had to develop those systems in order to have a government-to-government relationship with these colonial forces. So, safe to say, that's a new word for something we've been doing, feminism. So, just curious about do you call yourself a feminist? And does that resonate with you?
Oh, wow. I love these questions. I really do. I really do. Very rarely do I have the opportunity to really elaborate on these topics, with some very well-loved members of the community here, for real, But I'm gonna reel it back to 2020. I remember I was detoxing in a Airstream in Arroyo Seco. My mentor was like, yo, I seen you in the ditch washing your face. Are you good? And I was like, no, I'm not good. Hell to the no, I'm not good. I need to get clean. I need to be strong in my identity and my kind of gusto as a woman, And unfortunately, we experienced the global pandemic. We experienced George Floyd uprisings. We experienced the resistance of Indigenous people really taking on a mass media kind of like, I don't even know, it's like revolutionary, really. It was a revolutionary period of time that we don't talk about too often anymore. I think we're still actually learning to heal from it. But my point being in bringing it up is that I saw an image on Twitter, and this image was a row of SWAT team folk, police, you know, the feds, and they were there. They had their guns and all the weapons, and I seen in the picture there was a white woman sitting down in front of this row of, I imagine, white men, white cops. I can't say I know specifically how they identified, but they were cops, man. So there she was sitting there, and she didn't have any pants on. She had no pants on. She was just sitting there with her, her nice lingerie or whatever, and that struck a nerve in me. Never in my life had I ever seen a woman of color do anything like that. In my life, being raised from Taos. I couldn't imagine, and it's no shame, I understand the strategy, what she was doing, but if a woman from any of our communities did anything like that, that would be a target on her back. She would not live to tell the tale. She would not live to look at the social media clout. That's the severity of the missing and murdered Indigenous persons crisis. That's only one thread in a weaving, in a tapestry of experiences that we as Native women, Native people who have a voice have to confront. What are our methods in talking about these, talking about neocolonialism and systemic violence coming from the positionality of an Indigenous matriarch, or a matriarch at that? Any matriarch, what does it mean to lead in a good way and ensuring that all women are safe? So, to me, I don't identify as a feminist. Again, we'll reel it back and say I am respectfully egalitarian. This is about being a human being. But the women, they hold the power. We have the wombs, So Indigenous women just know how to operate different in that space. And we all know that. Emma, here we go, girl. Let's go, girl.
Personally, thank you, Midnite. Thank you. I cannot wait to just continue to see all the work that you do and this game-changing work. This next generation that we are creating. We're not creating feminists, we are creating beings that are sacred and know that they are sacred. So personally, I don't identify as a feminist. I identify as an Indigenous woman. And I think what makes the matriarchy and rematriarchation different is it also identifies and acknowledges Mother Earth. Because I don't, in the feminist culture, that's not something I hear. But when you listen to the Indigenous women that are acknowledging themselves as sacred, they also acknowledge the land. And one thing that was spoken about is you cannot connect to the land until you connect to yourself, and vice versa. And what happens to the land happens to us. And so when we begin to treat and see the land as equal, that is where healing begins. When we begin to heal the land, we begin to heal us. When we begin to heal us, we begin to heal the land. And that is what makes matriarchs different from feminists. I also acknowledging that balance that was spoken of, the balance of having feminine energy within and also having masculine energy within. I believe that that balance, as well as the balance and interconnection to the land, just makes us that much more sacred and that much more powerful, that much more whole.
Excellent. No, I do not identify as a feminist. In my house, we didn't do feminism. We had Angela Davis and Grace Lee Boggs in my house, so that was something that I was lucky to have a mom who was getting her education when I was a small kid. But yeah, the idea of feminism, I think, exists within like the Euro-American society paradigm, which we're all free to break apart of at any time we see necessary. I think that I would identify, if we're doing that, as an Indigenous futurist, or somebody who was it? It was like, I can't think of it, but it was basically the idea of carrying ancient and values and ideas into the future to create something brand new and beautiful. And I think that at this time more than ever, that's what's most important, is to create something beautiful for our youth and our children and those not born yet. I think that's our responsibility as people who come from matriarchs. I don't think I'm a matriarch yet. I'm not a mother, and I'm learning how to lead in my family. That's another story. So yeah, I think that there's a time and a place for like those ideas, and mostly, I mean, I find them in books more than in practice, and then in our lives, in real lives, it's more about doing what Grandma says and living your life how in those values, and I think that we're attempting to practice that today.
Thank you. What did I want to say? I had something I wanted to add. Oh, I am an Indigenous matriarch. I have an 11-year-old daughter. She's amazing. I had her at home. So my mom had me when she was 18. Her mom had her at Jemez Pueblo at the hands of a traditional midwife. And so in one generation, my mom was birthing in hospitals, when prior to that, the women before her, the matriarchs from my mom's side, all were born at the hands of midwives. And so when I was expecting my daughter, I really wanted to not have a labor in a hospital. I was like, if all the women before my mom had their babies at home, well, my grandma had 2 kids, her eldest with the traditional midwife at Taos, and then my mom at Jemez, because my grandpa was from Jemez, and then they moved to LA and had their kids in hospitals. And then my mom was a teen mom, so she just went with whatever was told. She did not breastfeed me either. So I really imagine what I could have been had I been breastfed. Might be president by now, y'all. So yeah, I mean, just my mom was like, we were encouraged to use formula. I mean, so imagine that's the mother's, that's, wow. I mean, just think of that an era of just that great destabilization of women's knowledge and birthing. And so when I had my daughter, I had her at home, and I reclaimed that ceremony, and it was hard to do an unmedicated birth, but it changed me. It was literally a spiritual rebirth, and it really fueled the advocacy that I do. So I think there's something to be said about unmedicalized birth. That's all I'm going to say. so last but not least, I, I'm pretty educated, as you know, may have figured out by now, but I often experience the deficit paradigm being imposed on me throughout my life because of my skin color, because of where I grew up in the hood in LA, because I was Indigenous, because I was Native, and always have been told over and over about what I couldn't do or what my limitations were in this body. And so I think a part of me achieving education was really like my clapback and my way of showing all the naysayers and people who told me I couldn't do things. And I really worked hard. I mean, it's hard to get a PhD. You got to write a dissertation, which is like literally like writing a book based on your research. And I am always wanting to push back against these deficit paradigms. You see our kids getting educated and being, tracked into special education because we learn differently and our intelligences are different than Western white Americans. And I just always want to counter this deficit paradigm that Indigenous people are beholden to in this white supremacist system that never affords us the ability to be fully human, much less could ever validate our multiversal intelligences and the ability to continue to adapt to what the times call for, like my grandparents who adapted in their time by moving to Los Angeles to raise a family. Instead of calling us deficit, special ed, all these things that are labels are placed on Indigenous people, I want to reframe the narrative and call who we are and what we do. I want to start calling it excellence. We need to create new frameworks for our giftedness and our own measures of success, seeing that we will never be validated in these Western systems because they could never fully recognize the multiplicity of our existence, our connection to the land, our spirituality. It's kind of building, I want to build these new languages and frameworks. Have you heard about intersectionality? African-American scholar Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term intersectionality to talk about the ways in which Black Americans have to deal with all the intersections of race, class, where they live, economics, color, colorism, all of these things. But I want to build on that. Where do we make room as Indigenous people for our spiritual and land-based connections and our responsibility therein? So what is bigger? What are new names I like multiversal, what was yours? Indigenous futurism, multiversal futurisms maybe. But I've been thinking about the ways in the new language and really just pushing back against all these deficit paradigms that continue to or fail or are just unable to acknowledge the excellence that we carry as Indigenous people. I mean, if this isn't a testament to that excellence, I don't know what is. So this leads to my final question about owning our Indigenous superpowers. Like you said, we're not resilient, we're adaptive. We're not resilient, we're ingenious. Indigenuity. That's a new word. Take that home with you. Indigenuity. So this is what makes Indigenous women so threatening to the status quo. Literally what you see here now, because we are the anti-venom to the toxic culture of violence. So final thoughts, what do you think our superpowers are as Indigenous women? I think we've already answered some of those. And why is it so needed now? What are your superpowers? Claim them, baby, claim them.
Claiming them. Well, I think my superpowers lie with being what some call a half-breed. I'm half white and I'm half red. There's a derogatory term known as an apple. If you're an apple, you look Indian on the outside, but on the inside, you're white. You act like the white man. Yeah. So for me personally, my superpower is to learn to be embodied and balanced with my indigeneity, right? To represent one of many people, right, who come from mixed backgrounds, mixed lineages. You know what I'm saying? being a traditionalist and also having ties to the Midwest, just to put it into perspective, my non-native family received land from John Quincy Adams when the Indians were forced off that land. To put that into perspective for me, you know, it's kind of troubling. You feel me? It's like, wow, what is my superpower? How can I live to tell this tale? How can I persevere? Right? With the woman sit next to me, that's the first step, for sure. Sobriety is the second. Being a good relative is the third, no matter where you come from. The tension that fuels my creative process comes with being a mixed-race relative. Everything that I have learned by bearing witness to the interiority of white supremacy, as if it runs through my bones, right? As well as bearing witness to the interiority of what it means to be humbled by the natural law of this place. What it means to be a Taos woman, what it means to be a Taos man, what it means to be Indigenous, what it means to be human. Feel me? Like, this is about equalizing the tension. And I'm here to share that with you in a good way. But y'all better keep up and do your research, because we're moving. We're moving quick. We're moving quick, and there's a lot of good work that needs to be done. So, you know, be a good relative to yourself and others. That's my message, and that's what I want to stand on. And I'm open, truly open to the community for any feedback. And, you know, as far as collaborations as it regards to Home Camp Initiative, which is a service organized by and for Pueblo people of northern New Mexico who are resisting displacement, right? So when you think about displacement in a neo-colonial context, what does that mean? Not having the opportunity to drink your own water, to live on your own land, to live financially, you know, sustainable in the economy that is fraught with disparity here. You feel me? So this is about supporting the next generation, the existing generations, right? The existing peoples who are the knowledge bearers and have a baton to pass on to the next. So please let me know. You can find me at Home Camp Initiative. And yeah, be safe, y'all, for real. Much love, and thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Did you hear her? Be a good relative. I absolutely love that. What is my superpower? I believe my superpower is being an Indigenous recovering addict, because I have experienced darkness. I have experienced despair. I've experienced hopelessness. There was once upon a time where I didn't want to be alive. I didn't see hope for the world, for myself, and I wanted to unalive myself. But overcoming that, everything that it's taken to overcome that has become my superpower. My superpower is the connections that I have, because I can't do this alone. But together we can accomplish anything. That connection is my superpower. And the balance that it takes to walk in two different worlds. And not only am I a recovering addict, not only am I Indigenous, but I'm also just a person trying to make it in modern society. Pay my bills, eventually try to buy a house, all the things that we do as modern Americans. I also walk in that world. And I also balance that by walking in a traditional Indigenous world. What does that look like? I recently had to adapt, and I relocated to Albuquerque. I've been there for almost 2 years now, and it's been beneficial to my healing as an independent woman, but also continuously staying connected to my Indigenous roots and not losing touch of that, not losing touch of the lessons that my elders who are still alive have to teach, not losing touch of the lessons that my matriarchs have to pass down to me, because if I am not present in both worlds, then I fail. But also that resistance, that resilience. even if I do fail, I get back up. And that is my superpower. Not only the connection to the sisters and brothers that I have that encourage me to fully be human. I'm a spiritual being and having a human experience. And that is my superpower. The connection to spirit, the connection to the land, the connection to my sisters and my brothers and my parents, my elders, all of those that have came before me. If I can help pave the way for those that are to come, that's a superpower. And I encourage each and every one of you, and I want to extend my gratitude to each and every one of you. The fact that we have almost a full room here willing to learn, being good relatives. Thank you. Give yourself a round of applause. This gives me hope that we're having these kind of conversations, that we are acknowledging who we are and being acknowledged. And so in turn, I do want to, again, acknowledge each and every one of you for coming out. And I also am an open book. I work in the recovery field. I also work in creative arts and look forward to any collaboration, whether that's on a personal level, professional level. You just want a hug. Hugs are healing. So thank you all for being here, and thank you again for having all of us. It's a privilege and honor to know you and work with you.
You're super powerful. My superpower is a disability and chronic condition. Years ago, I had an unknown autoimmune disorder which required me to get very major surgery. And I didn't think a lot about disability awareness before that, and I never had to. I was strong. We were hiking like 16-mile hikes the summer before. Like we were doing it. I was at my peak, and then that happened. And when I was recovering from that, I specifically remember having a moment when everything was fresh and reality was setting in, and standing up was like so laborious and intensive just to stand up for a few minutes. And I realized this is what our grandmas feel like every day, and they still carry the whole world on their backs. And I really thought about that. I really thought this is what our grandmas feel like. And not long after that, Saya Kathy at Pueblo-women United called me. I had been working there for a few years prior. She called me up and said, I need an assistant and I think you would be perfect. And so I began to work with elders. I began to work with grandmothers, and it's some being around elders, as I was explaining before, was really how I grew up. It's still how I socialize sometimes. I feel like I have kind of like an old attitude, especially if you know any Oklahoma Indians. I feel like you would understand. But yeah, I really resonate with our elders, like y'all were saying. They all have something for us, and so many times us as young people, we really downplay their knowledge or think like, oh, well, I'm the active one, like you don't know, you don't experience my experience every day. But really they have like worlds and worlds of knowledge. Even if it's not traditional knowledge, they still have something to share. So if your grandma or your grandpa is still here, go hug them after this. And yeah, just having insight into not being a strong young person anymore really brought me to a humble place to understand that not only is life quick and short, and so we should all be good to each other, but also just that it can all be taken away, and we still, like you were saying, we still get up and we still survive, and our grandmas still carry the world on their backs. And to be a person who comes from that is an honor, a privilege, and yeah. So thank you all for being here and sitting with us in our conversations, and look forward to chatting some more sometime.
Thank you all for coming. I guess I should say what my superpower is. I didn't even think about it. I wrote these questions up. I guess I'm answering them as we go. I think my superpower is just malleability. Being raised urban, but being raised by my grandparents, I can move through spaces, and I always try to make room for others in those spaces. And my education has helped me. It's actually kind of was my path back to my roots. So growing up in LA, I came back to New Mexico to go to college, and I just started, I was getting a Western education, but I was like, what does it mean to be a Pueblo woman? And so my educational path, coming back to New Mexico to go to college, getting my first degree from UNM, that's when I really started as an adult going back on my own to my Pueblos, and it's been a lifelong journey of learning and cultural reclamation. So I think my superpower is being a bridge for others, and I really try to be that support for others, and share my resources, my knowledge, my opportunities, and just give back in the ways that were given to me. I had great mentors and great people who brought me to where I am, and so I have to now do that for others. So Ta'a, thank you all. There was one more slide. If you're interested in some local organizations to follow, Three Sisters Collective, Autumn Gomez and myself are co-founders. Home Camp Initiative, that's Midnite's org. You can find out how to directly support her. Pueblo Action Alliance. We have any members of Pueblo Action Alliance in the building? Yes, there's Yucca from Taos Pueblo, Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women, No False Solutions. No False Solutions is doing a lot of work around the greenwashing of the language. Now, all these different industries that are cropping up that they're trying to bring to New Mexico that are really greenwashing and making these things sound good when they're really not. So this is No False Solutions is a great website to really understand what's going on in the political spectrum around our lands and resources here. Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women. Yucca, they're a young environmental justice org. Earth Care, they do a lot of environmental legislation work. New Mexico Climate Justice, and Indigenous Lifeways. Those are all orgs you can follow, look into. They're awesome, New Mexico-based orgs. So Ta'a, thank you. It's been a pleasure sharing this evening with you. Come see us at Taos during our open events, where everybody's welcome. I'm sure you already do that. But we look forward to seeing you out in community and talking to you after the fact, and you all get home safely and enjoy this beautiful rain. And Ta'a, thank you. It's been a great evening.